A 22-foot golden statue of Donald Trump has just been unveiled in Florida. Not in a museum, not as satire on a public square, not as a temporary art installation meant to provoke debate, but at Trump's own golf resort, in a ceremony led by an evangelical pastor, with Trump himself calling in to thank the crowd. The statue shows him with his fist raised high, a direct reference to one of the most iconic images of his political life, the moment after the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, when he stood up, bloodied and defiant. Supporters say it represents resilience, patriotism, and survival. Critics say it looks like something out of an authoritarian personality cult. And for many Christians, the gold color and the religious ceremony triggered an even more explosive comparison: the golden calf. This is one of those stories that sounds ridiculous at first, almost too absurd to be politically important. A giant gold Trump statue? Really? But when you look closer, this is about much more than one sculpture in Florida. It's about how modern political movements build symbolism. It's about the merging of religion and power. It's about the aesthetics of strongman politics. And it's about how even a meme-fueled publicity stunt can reveal something deeper about the political moment America is in right now. So in this video, we're going to break down what happened, who paid for it, why a pastor blessed it, why critics are invoking both the Bible and North Korea, and what this entire spectacle tells us about Trumpism in 2026. Because whether you see this statue as patriotic tribute, political theater, or something far darker, one thing is certain. This wasn't just a random art project. It was a message, and the symbolism is the whole story. Let's start with the facts. A massive gold-colored statue of Donald Trump was unveiled at Trump National Doral, Miami, his golf property in Florida. Reports describe it as a 15-foot bronze statue mounted on a 7-foot base, bringing the full height to 22 feet. The statue shows Trump with his right fist in the air, echoing the now famous post-assassination attempt image from July 2024, when he emerged from chaos in Butler with blood on his ear and raised his fist in a moment that quickly became central to his political mythology. The unveiling wasn't quiet. It was staged as a dedication ceremony. The statue was draped in white and blue fabric before being revealed. Guests were seated around it. Pastor Mark Burns, a longtime Trump ally and member of Pastors for Trump, led the event and framed the statue not merely as a work of art, but as a symbol of life, resilience, freedom, patriotism, and strength. Burns also connected the statue to the idea that God had preserved Trump through multiple assassination attempts. Trump did not appear in person at the ceremony, but he called in by phone. In remarks played to the crowd, he thanked Pastor Mark Burns, said the statue had been done from love, and noted that everyone was taking pictures of it. On Truth Social, Trump later celebrated the installation, posting an image of the statue and calling it the real deal, gold, at Doral in Miami, put there by great American patriots. And that detail matters, because the language around this statue was not shy, ironic, or understated. It was triumphal, emotional, reverential. The statue wasn't unveiled as a joke. It was introduced with ceremony, defended with religious language, and presented as a patriotic monument to a living political leader. Now here's where the story becomes even stranger. According to multiple reports, the statue was commissioned and financed by a group of cryptocurrency investors and Trump supporters linked to the memecoin dollar patriot. Their goal appears to have been part political tribute, part branding exercise, part visibility campaign. In other words, this wasn't simply a wealthy donor buying a monument. It was also a fusion of internet-era finance, political fandom, and spectacle marketing. That tells us a lot about the current political media environment. In a previous era, political monuments were commissioned by governments, cities, or institutions, usually after a leader had died and history had at least begun to settle its judgment. But here, a living president receives a giant gold monument at his own property, commissioned not by the state, but by a network of crypto-linked enthusiasts seeking attention, legitimacy, and viral momentum. That is a very 2026 story. The line between politics, fandom, finance, religion, and online branding is collapsing. This statue sits exactly at that intersection. It is not just a sculpture. It is a content machine. It is a campaign symbol. It is a meme with a pedestal. A giant gold Trump statue tied to crypto promotion, caught in a payment dispute, then finally trucked to a Florida Gulf resort and unveiled in a quasi-religious ceremony. If you wrote this as satire 5 years ago, people would say it was too on the nose. The fiercest backlash came from one obvious place: religion. Almost immediately after images of the statue spread online, critics, including many on social media, began comparing it to the biblical golden calf. For people unfamiliar with the reference, the golden calf story comes from the Old Testament. While Moses is absent, the Israelites create a golden idol and worship it, violating God's command against idolatry. That story has become one of the most enduring symbols in Judeo-Christian tradition for false worship, misplaced devotion, and moral corruption through spectacle. So when people saw a gold statue of Trump, a living political leader, being publicly blessed by an evangelical pastor, the symbolism practically detonated on contact. On social media, reactions ranged from sarcastic to alarmed. Some wrote that the Bible was quite explicit on this issue. Others joked that Scripture had already covered the dangers of golden idols. The critique wasn't subtle. To many viewers, the event looked like political devotion sliding into something that resembled worship. Pastor Mark Burns pushed back immediately and forcefully. But critics argue that context is everything. This was not just a statue in a public square. It was a gold statue of a sitting president at his own property, unveiled in a ceremony by a pastor who has described Trump in near-providential terms, while explicitly connecting the statue to divine protection over Trump's life. That context is what made the golden calf comparison so powerful. The issue wasn't only the object. It was the ritual around the object, the language around the object, the mythology around the object. And once that symbolism clicks into place, the backlash becomes understandable, even inevitable. But the controversy didn't stop with religion. A second line of criticism emerged almost instantly: that the statue resembled the political aesthetics of authoritarian regimes, especially North Korea. According to reporting carried by MSN from Newsweek, several commentators online compared the newly installed Trump statue to monuments of Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea's ruling dynasty. The comparison focused on the metallic finish, oversized scale, heroic posture, and the broader visual language of leader glorification. One former media executive described the Trump and Kim monuments as remarkably similar, while another critic said Trump had finally achieved his dream of resembling North Korean leadership imagery. Now, to be clear, America is not North Korea, and Trump's supporters would argue that comparing a privately financed statue to totalitarian state iconography is exaggerated and hysterical. But again, symbolism matters. Across the world, strongman politics often rely on more than policy. They rely on images of power, immortality, destiny, and heroic singularity. Giant statues, giant portraits, giant slogans. These things serve a purpose. They transform politics into spectacle. They turn leaders into symbols larger than institutions themselves. And that's why so many people reacted so strongly here. The statue doesn't merely show Trump. It monumentalizes him. It freezes him in a victorious pose. It presents him as defiant, untouchable, almost mythic. To supporters, that's inspirational. To critics, that's precisely the problem. In democracies, there is always tension between admiration and adoration. And one of the key warning signs critics watch for is when loyalty to a leader begins to overshadow loyalty to institutions, principles, or even shared reality. That's why the word cult keeps reappearing in responses to this statue. Supporters see devotion. Critics see personality cult aesthetics. Here's the deeper reason this story resonates so strongly. The statue is not an accident. It is almost a perfect physical embodiment of Trump's political brand. Think about the elements: gold, luxury, excess, spectacle, defiance, television-ready visuals, a living leader cast in monumental form, and a single image, the raised fist after Butler, converted into durable political mythology. Trump's politics have always functioned partly through visual dominance. His movement thrives on images that are instantly legible: the red hat, the giant rallies, the raised fist, the courthouse shot, the mugshot, the triumphant entrance, the airplane, the stagecraft. So, of course, a giant gold statue works inside that ecosystem. It doesn't need to persuade skeptics. It just needs to energize believers and trigger opponents. That's enough to dominate the conversation. And in that sense, the statue has already succeeded. Because even people who hated it couldn't stop talking about it. That's an underrated part of Trump's media power. Outrage is not always a liability for him. Sometimes it's the fuel. Every denunciation, every mockery, every viral comparison can reinforce the central image. Trump as the unavoidable center of attention. The man who cannot be ignored. The man whose supporters glorify him and whose critics amplify him. And there's another layer. The pose itself matters enormously. This is not a calm presidential likeness. It is not Trump seated, or speaking, or even smiling. It is Trump in combat posture, fist raised, surviving, fighting, pushing forward. That image turns political survival into political sainthood. It transforms a real violent event into enduring iconography. That is why this monument is much more than decorative. It is a myth-making object. Now let's talk about one of the most important layers of this story, the religious one. Pastor Mark Burns didn't just defend the statue after the fact. He actively helped frame it from the start as a legitimate expression of honor and gratitude. He connected it to divine protection. He said it stands as a reminder of the hand of God over Trump's life. That matters because Trump's relationship with segments of the evangelical movement has long involved more than ordinary political endorsement. For some supporters, Trump is not merely a preferred candidate. He is seen as chosen, protected, or divinely used. And this is where the political significance really deepens. When religion is used to moralize politics, politics stops being a contest of policies and starts becoming a struggle between sacred mission and evil opposition. In that environment, a leader can become more than a politician. He can become a vessel of providence. Criticism of him can start to feel like criticism of the cause itself. That doesn't mean every evangelical who supports Trump sees him this way. Of course not. But the visual language of this ceremony, the blessing, the rhetoric of divine preservation, the insistence that this is sacred honor rather than idolatry, shows how porous the line can become between political loyalty and quasi-religious reverence. And once that line starts to blur, the symbolism becomes explosive. Because to critics, the problem isn't just theology. It's democracy. If a leader is treated as providential, anointed, untouchable, or uniquely protected by God, then ordinary political accountability becomes harder. Opponents stop being fellow citizens with different views and start being enemies of a higher mission. That is why this statue sparked such a wide reaction beyond the usual social media mockery. It touched a nerve about the future of political culture itself. Now, some people will say, who cares? It's just a weird statue at a golf course. But the reason this matters goes beyond Trump and even beyond America. Across the world, democracies are being tested by leaders and movements that increasingly rely on spectacle, emotion, grievance, and cult-like symbolism. We've seen versions of this in many places. The elevation of the leader above the party, above institutions, sometimes even above the nation's founding values. What makes the Trump statue story significant is that it compresses several global political trends into one image. You have celebrity politics. You have populist hero worship. You have the fusion of nationalism and faith. You have crypto money and online fandom entering real-world politics. And you have a leader's personal brand becoming physically monumentalized while he is still in power. That is not normal democratic symbolism. At the very least, it is unusual. And at the most serious level, it raises questions about where political culture is heading. What happens when politics becomes performance first, institution second? What happens when a movement becomes emotionally dependent on one man's image? What happens when reverence replaces scrutiny? Those are the real questions beneath the gold leaf. Because the danger in political spectacle is not always that it immediately creates authoritarianism. Sometimes the danger is subtler. It normalizes habits of mind that make democratic erosion easier later. And that is why this story deserves more attention than it first seems to. So what is this statue really? To Trump supporters, it's a tribute, a monument to survival, a symbol of strength after violence, a patriotic statement built by people who believe Trump changed America and kept fighting when others would have broken. To critics, it's something else entirely, a warning sign, a symbol of political idolatry, a made-for-viral content monument that reveals just how far the culture of personality around Trump has gone. A bizarre fusion of religion, branding, money, and power wrapped in gold. And maybe the truth is that it's both a spectacle and a signal. Because the statue does what all potent political symbols do. It tells different audiences different things. To believers, it says, he endures. To critics, it says, this movement is becoming something deeper and stranger. To the rest of the world, it says, American politics is still producing images so surreal that they look almost fictional, until you realize they're very real. A gold Trump statue standing in Florida, blessed by a pastor, funded by crypto backers, praised by Trump himself, attacked as a golden calf, and compared by critics to authoritarian monuments abroad. That is not just a headline. That is a snapshot of the political age we are living through. And the most important part may not be the statue itself. It may be the fact that millions of people instantly understood what it symbolized. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more deep dives into global politics, political symbolism, power narratives, and the stories behind the headlines. Because in modern politics, the spectacle is never just the spectacle. It's the strategy.